Yes! Good times. Another episode of Bar Tips for my friends. Yes. It's another episode of Home Bar Tips here on the J. Jackson Mobile Mixologist blog. Today I'm going to talk about something pretty controversial, actually. This is a question that comes up a lot whenever I do mixology lessons for private events, for bachelorette weekends, or birthday parties. People ask me this question a lot. They ask me, so when should I buy good stuff and when should I buy cheap stuff? And they're usually talking about, bourbon or wine or vodka or gin, etc. And it's a really interesting question because it comes up a lot. I never thought it would be such a common question. I thought it would be a question that I would think about, but not what they would think about. Which means it might be a question that you think about. When do I buy cheap stuff? When do I buy good stuff? So this is the question that comes up a lot to me when I'm creating budgets for my clients. So one of the questions I'll ask you when you're filling out a form for us to serve at your event is, what's the most important thing to you? Is it creating the most like wow kind of experience for your guests? Is it really about surprising and delighting them no matter what the cost? Is it about creating a very curated experience that really represents who you are? Or is it really just to get the most value out of the money you're spending? Or is it even, gasp, I don't care, I just want it to be as cheap as possible, and I don't really care if it's really any good. And so that helps me to kind of know, okay, who am I actually really talking to? Or when my sales rep gives them a call, it helps them know, okay, what's really important to them? Because we are a concierge level bartending service, and that means you don't fit into one box or this box or that box. We're here to create the vision that you want to create for your guests, and people's values are different. So when you're doing an event for more than 10 people and for more hours than, say, one, which is most events, then volume becomes an issue. Because if you're having a party or a wedding reception that goes for longer than 3 hours, and you have, say, 100 guests, 150 guests, 150 guests, 200 or 200 guests, then we have to start thinking about how much alcohol is it going to take to meet this amount of servings that we have to plan for in order for the event to be a success. Well, the problem with wine is that no matter what you spend per bottle of wine, you're only getting 5 servings per bottle. So it could be a $5 bottle of wine. It could be a $28 bottle of wine. If we have to get, let's just say, 200 servings of wine stocked in order to make your event successful, then we're looking at $28 divided by 5. That's how much it's going to cost per serving if you want this really fancy-pantsy wine at your wedding. And so I almost always steer my guests towards cheaper product, which might be a surprise to some people. And the reason being is we're in the servings game. We're not in a sell you buy the drink kind of game, in which case somebody's going to have to spend $8 to $12 to $15 per serving if I was selling it by the drink, which is not a good value if you're having a 3 to 5 hour wedding reception. So the question becomes then, am I sacrificing taste for price? And this is what this video is about. The answer is no. The answer is what you're actually paying for when you buy a $28 Cabernet Sauvignon or a $55 bourbon, or a $120 rye whiskey for that matter. What are you actually paying for? And I'm not going to go into all the details as to what makes one brand what and that kind of stuff. I actually have a whole episode dedicated to that question coming up, so stay tuned. But what I want you to think about is this. The reason why you can get a bottle of Evan Williams for $12 a bottle, at least here in Nashville. Or you can get a bottle of Rex Goliath wine for $5, or Behringer or something like that for that cheap, is not because it's bad per se. It's because it's made in bulk. It's made in a huge amount, and the product going into the process to make the wine or make the whiskey is not super selective. So, for example, another great example is coffee. Okay, so this is a great example. Coffee is a great example. So, if you wanted to get, say, Seattle's Best, or Starbucks, or Javalia, or Community Coffee, or Folgers, dare I even say, you're getting coffee that was bought by a bunch of different estates, like acres and acres and acres of coffee beans, and they were all grabbed, and some of them were in different, they weren't all in peak condition. Some were green, some were ripe, whatever, and it's all being thrown into the mix, and it's all being roasted at a certain level in order to make it consistent. And they're getting a whole bunch of it, and they're not taking into account the sensitivities about weather and that kind of stuff. They're just roasting it at a level where it becomes consistent. And that's partly why Starbucks is so dang dark. But in so doing, they're able to have a certain kind of price because they're trying to meet a very large market. You can get Starbucks either in retail or through a store pretty much anywhere. They're everywhere. Or Folgers or Community Coffee or whatever. You can get that almost anywhere. Now, if you wanted a really very special coffee that has a very unique character, I'm getting a nuttiness. I'm getting this really interesting acidity. I'm getting this very almost cooling effect in my mouth when it finishes. Wow, really unique. That comes from very unique conditions that are true to certain estates at certain times of year, certain hills. The more specific it gets, the more unique it becomes. Well, 1 acre of farm in all of Guatemala, harvested at that one specific time, and then roasted a certain way, you cannot recreate that on the scale that you can with Starbucks. You can only make so much of it. So in order to make it worth the trouble, you have to charge a certain amount. It's a simple supply and demand thing. Okay, hope that makes sense. So let's apply this to wine. Great, it's just fermented grape juice. Grapes grow everywhere. Okay, so if you just take a whole bunch of Cabernet Sauvignon grapes from all over an entire region and you throw it into a big batch in order to meet a very large demand and have a certain price point, then you just don't get very specific about all the different regions you're getting it from. Same thing with whiskey. Now, I know this might shock you, this next thing I'm going to share with you, but it's going to feel like I'm telling you Santa isn't real for the first time, but a lot of the bourbon you drink comes from sourcing distilleries, i.e. giant warehouses and giant distillery complexes that create the product for lots of different labels. A lot of it comes from Indiana. Doesn't even come from bourbon. But basically, if you look at a bottle of bourbon that says it comes from Bardstown, Kentucky, it's coming from this one place, this one building that makes Kentucky straight bourbon for a bunch of different brands. Okay, what makes bourbon in particular unique is that a certain mash bill, a certain recipe of grains and mixes, and a certain yeast was fermented for a certain amount of time, and then once it gets distilled and put into a barrel, where it gets put in the barrel house, the temperature, etc., creates a unique flavor, as opposed to something like a very large distiller, like say Jim Beam. They're just taking a bunch of those barrels and they're mixing it all together to make a very general bottling in order to meet the high demand that market segment is trying to meet. And that's why Jim Beam, for example, has such a low price point, because it's all getting mixed together in the what's called the rick house, the barrel house. It's all being mixed together to make one bottling. And so you have now what's cool about that is that it's not very unique or surprising in its flavor, but it's very consistent. A lot of people want consistency. They want to know every time they open a bottle of Jack Daniels or Jim Beam or whatever, or Buffalo Trace, they want it to taste like their brand. You can get consistency that way. It's not wrong. It's just more consistent. That's what some people want and some people don't. So, I hope that makes sense. So, a rick house might have a special barrel way back in the back of the rick house or up in the rafters. And over time, that particular barrel develops some really unique characteristics. Of course, if that barrel was to then get mixed with all the other ones, you would lose that uniqueness. Or you can take that one barrel or that one group of barrels and bottle them on their own and create a whole new product with it. So, for example, people love Pappy Van Winkle. They think it's so unique and so special and it's so expensive. It's expensive because there's a limited amount of it. It comes from the exact same barrel house as H.W. Weller. It's just when the master distiller tastes it, it goes, okay, this is going to go in the A list, this is the B list, this is the C list. A list then goes in another special spot and then just sits there for 12 years and then becomes Pappy 12 or whatever it is. I'm being very simplified in my storytelling here, but that's essentially what it is. With cheaper products, you're not always getting a bad product. You're just getting a very consistent product because how it was sourced is not as definitive or limited in its availability, and therefore you're losing certain characteristics. So how does this apply when you're actually choosing brands for your party? So, like, let's use my favorite cheap wine, Rex Goliath. They make a rosé, a Sauv Blanc, a Pinot Grigio, a Cab, a Pinot Noir, a Merlot, and these wines, they go for $5 a bottle, at least now. They might go up to $8 a bottle soon. But, like, they go for $5 a bottle where I get them. And they don't taste bad. They just taste one note. Okay? So, a Rex Goliath or a Beringer Cabernet is just going to taste like that kind of plump, juicy Cab flavor that you look for with a Cabernet. No, you're not going to get forest floor or black pepper or black currants or rose or, a really unique long finish. You get those from $28 bottles of Cab or $32 bottles of Cab or even $16 bottles of Cab because those are special vintages. They have limited availability because they were selected in a very certain way before they were fermented. Same thing with bourbon. You might get really interesting, like, anise notes, or a caramelly pecan flavor, or baked stone fruit. But you might not get that in, say, Jim Beam. I keep picking on Jim Beam, but we all know what we're talking about. You're just going to get that one note bourbon flavor. It's not a bad flavor. It's just kind of a consistent one note flavor. It's kind of an apple-y flavor. And that's about it. And that's okay. That's okay because here's the deal. People are going to your party and they're mixing this stuff. So you can take a $12 bottle of Evan Williams, or you can take a $48 bottle of High West, and you're going to pour Coke over that or ginger ale over that anyway. You're not going to get any of the value from the High West once your guests pour the ginger ale over it. You're just going to get a more expensive whiskey and ginger ale. So I recommend selecting brands this way, especially if you're going to be hosting an event. If you're going to be having a general mixer kind of situation where it's like, vodka cranberry and whiskey and Coke and rum and Sprite and that kind of stuff, then you want to go with brands that are cheaper. You don't want to go with really expensive, fancy brands unless you want to have cocktails that are more spirit forward, like a Jack Rose or a Hanky Panky or a Manhattan or martinis, where basically they're just spirits that are kind of rounded out with splashes of other ingredients like Peychaud's or lemon or bitters or that kind of thing. If you're having longer drinks like Moscow Mules, French 75s, Tom Collins, or really basic drinks like Cuba Libras and that kind of thing, then you don't want to have really expensive spirits. You want to have spirits that are good and consistent and cheap. My pet brands here in Nashville is Evan Williams for bourbon, New Amsterdam for gin, Svedka for vodka, and Tesoro Mio for tequila, and Cruzan for rum. Cruzan, it's spelled Cruzan. They call it Cruzan. It's actually called Cruzan. Fun fact. But these bottles go for $12. And you can't tell the difference when you're drinking them mixed with Coke or Sprite or whatever. Now, if you want to have more involved cocktails where the spirit is really out in front, like a martini, for example, then yes, you want to go with a higher tiered spirit. But keep in mind, when you have a wedding for 150 guests, it becomes expensive very quick. When you're looking at about $2.25 per serving versus 85 cents per serving, and you need to have 500, 600 servings to consider. So I hope that makes sense. There is a time to go cheap and there's a time to go expensive, and they're not wrong. Of course, I do want to warn you, there is a point where the value starts to deteriorate. So, for example, Svedka vodka is great at $12 a bottle, but Taka, which comes for $12 a handle and is served out of a giant plastic jug, not so much. I use that stuff for cleaning my tools, actually. It's actually great as a preservative, but not as anything you want to drink with. So I hope that makes sense. I hope you are able to be more empowered to choose brands that are going to serve you well in certain situations. I hope it wasn't too rambling or too boring. I'm just very passionate about this, and I'm very passionate about your event, and I want you to, as we say here, I want you to celebrate well, and that means having an event that's going to really impress your friends, create memories, but also not crush your wallet if it didn't have to. So thank you again. Thanks for spending some time with us. We look forward to the next chance we get to hang out. And as always, celebrate well.